Okay, good evening again. Okay, tonight we're going to be dealing with, it's not on it, I don't need it. We're going to be dealing with life cycles. Always a fun topic. And we're going to begin with a question that is debated in the Talmud. And the question is, was it better for man to have been created, or would man be better off had God never decided to try out this experiment of the human species? Now, it's one of those questions which I think most of us probably wouldn't think about discussing, but the Talmud does. But it's the answer that might surprise you. Anybody know the answer? It's better to be alive, right? Well, there's several ways to read the Talmudic answer. The simple way is that it would have been better had God not created man. But since he already did, well, now we got to make the best of it. Better for us. Because the responsibilities and the challenges that life throws our way are so overwhelming at times that, including the mitzvot that we have to do, both mitzvot to God as well as interpersonal mitzvot. The Talmud in other places speaks about honoring your parents. It's such a difficult mitzvah that it's almost better, if you didn't have parents, so to speak, at least. The way the Talmud describes it. So obviously it's, it's a little difficult to be around when not have parents, right? But here's a Hasidic approach to that Talmud. The word that is actually used in the Talmud is not tov. Tov means good. It doesn't say tov lo l'adam, it's better for man had he not been created. It says Noach. Now Noach, like the guy you know from the flood, the name Noach means minucha, which means to rest, to relax. So Noach lo l'adam could be interpreted as it would have been more pleasing to man not to have been created. But it can also be understood as it would have been more relaxing for man had he not been created. Because then we would have nothing, no jobs. We wouldn't be here to worry about anything. But now that God created us, we have a mission to fulfill in the world, and that is to make the world a better place, a more habitable place for God, and we've got a lot of work to do. So that's just a general introduction to the whole idea of, we're going to talk about birth in a second. Man was created in the image of God. Forgive me if I mentioned something that I said a few weeks ago. It's a little difficult talking to various classes and adults and never remember what I said to who. So if I went through this a few weeks ago, just raise your hand and I'll stop. Did we talk about the synagogue and the morgue? We didn't? Okay, I was sure I had. There's an interesting question. What happens if a fire breaks out? There's a synagogue right next door to the morgue. Where do you run to first? To save the Torah scrolls or to save the dead bodies? You can ask your son, he knows the answer. Anybody want to take a crack at it? Dead bodies, Torah. From a financial perspective, definitely go for the Torahs. Right? Torah's very expensive. The answer is you go for the bodies first. Now, even though a lot of people cremate their loved ones, which is a whole other subject, but it teaches us the tremendous value associated not just with the living body, but even with a corpse. The body itself has holiness attached to it. And while it may be lifeless, it's still created in the image of God. And there's something sacred about it. Another law in the Torah says that if a person is hung for his crime, you're not allowed to leave the body hanging overnight. The great commentator Rashi says, why not? So he uses the following analogy. Imagine if a king has a twin brother, and the twin is a criminal, and they hang him up in the town square, and people walk by and they say, look, the king is hanging. It's humiliating. Now, we know it's not the king, but because they look alike, some association. Because we're created in the image of God, God forbid if a person is humiliated, if a person is hanging, it's a reflection on God. Now, same thing, the guy's dead already. The answer is it's not just the living being that's created in the image of God, it's the person. It's even the body. There's holiness attached to the body. We are living through incredible times, and I'm not sure the word incredible is the right adjective, where there simply is no appreciation for the sanctity of life at all, tragically. My wife and I were in Florida this week. We had planned this visit for many months to visit our son, who's a student in this little city, which you may have heard of since last week, called Coral Springs. Coral Springs is to Parkland like Westlake is to Thousand Oaks or to Agoura Hills. In fact, the person, I'm not going to call him a gentleman, I'm not going to mention his name, the person who was apprehended for his alleged crime was apprehended just a few blocks away from the yeshiva. So my son took me to all the spots. This is where they caught him, and this is where the school is, and this is where it is. So Sunday night, after spending the afternoon going to a Japanese garden and lunch with our son, we decided that we would hand deliver a card that was created by our C-Teen group. C-Teen is the Chabad teens. I don't know if you came early enough to see. You were here when they all took off? Oh, you dropped? That's right. Your daughter's on there, right? One of the 27. Your son is there as well. 27 kids who are on their way to Burbank Airport now and flying to New York for an incredible weekend with God's help. So, what am I talking about this? Coral Springs. Oh, C-Teen, that's why. So the C-Teen group created a card to bring to the families, and we decided that rather than just give it to the rabbi of the C-Teens, we would hand deliver it. Not knowing what we would find on the other side of the door. So we drove up to the first house. Sadly, there was way more protection to get to the houses of these people than there was to get into the school. 3 of the 4 families we went to live in gated communities, and you had to show your driver's license and take it out of your wallet, and the arm lifts up, couldn't just get in. Came into the house, and I said, I'm not from here. Can someone point out the parents to me? And they did. The parents were overwhelmed with gratitude that we had come. I gave them the card. We were there for at least an hour. Met the grandparents. And it's not for tonight because I can spend an hour. And if you're interested, come to Shul Shabbos in Westlake. I'm going to be talking about it. The point I want to make is that when the dust settles and all the hysteria calms down, gun laws are wonderful and we need them, and no problem with that. But there's something else that this country needs desperately, and it's called a good teaching about the sanctity of life. Because as I pointed out to the kids this afternoon in Hebrew High, when Israel figured out how to foil terrorists and hijackings, so they resorted to other things. When they figured out how to find bombs, they took guns. They blocked the guns, they took knives. They take away knives, they take their cars, and they mow down people. You're never going to stop evil. Can't. They'll do anything. 9/11, I will remind you, didn't happen with any guns. It happened with little box cutters. Okay? The whole 9/11. Wasn't a single gun involved in it. So we can make gun laws. Will it protect? Hopefully it will stop a few crazies from getting weapons. Hopefully. But there needs to be a comprehensive solution to this. And it's got to start with everyone. Parents, educators. As I said to someone the other day, he was doing a grassroots effort. I said, why aren't you demonstrating against Hollywood and against the makers of these video games? Kid's 5 years old and he's being taught how to kill people. What happened to Sorry, Scrabble, Monopoly, Trouble, and all those wonderful games that we played? Nobody was being killed. They don't do that anymore. Now they sit a whole day and they're killing. And your son is telling me the games that are out there. It's crazy stuff. And these are not adults. One kid said to me, well, there was always this kind of entertainment. True, for adults. Not for kids who are 5 years old learning how to kill people. So a few years ago, if you remember, you had this guy who was addicted to video games and he killed his parents, fully expecting them that the next morning they would just wake up because that's what happens in the video game. Remember that story? All right, crazy. But this is what we're doing to these kids. I heard a commercial on the radio just before. I'm not even sure what the name of the movie was, but it was a lot of violence and rated R, under 17 admitted only with your parent. Why? So what's going to help me to have my parent next to me? What are you teaching me? What are you showing me? You ever flying on JetBlue, everybody has their own TV screen? You look up. Wherever you look, sex and violence. Unless somebody's interested in cooking, they're watching a cooking show. What have we come to? And then we expect kids to grow up normal? Oh, we'll take away the guns, we'll have gun laws, and everything is going to be just perfect. I can only imagine. Anyway, until we address it like that, nothing's going away, sadly. Which leads me to another topic related, and perhaps more for the end, if we ever make it all the way to the end tonight, which is death. I think the flyer just said we're supposed to stop at the wedding, I think, at the chuppah. But we'll see how ambitious we are. And that is, it dawned on me, the Jewish religion places a lot of emphasis on productivity. Don't waste your time. If you grew up in a traditional Jewish home, you were always encouraged. What are you doing? Well, it's wasting your time. Do something. Read a book. Do something. Go for a walk. Do something. Don't just, waste your time. Now, please understand, I'm not against vacations. I love them. I'm not against relaxation. They're important. I understand. But I'm trying to make a point. In the secular world, for lack of a better term, Saturday, it's a day off. Sunday is a day off. My kids went to school. Sunday was a regular day. All right, a few hours less, but Sunday was a day. So we have Saturday off, we have Sunday off. There doesn't seem to be this tremendous emphasis on every moment has to be filled with something productive. You're entitled to chill, watch television, watch movies, watch baseball games, go fishing, which, I know it's very relaxing. I'm allergic to fish, so I don't go fishing. Given the smell, it drives me nuts. But if you want to talk about being unproductive, if you're hungry for fish, go to the market, buy a piece of fish. You sit on the boat a whole day, you're lucky you catch one fish. You call that productive? Okay, so it's relaxing, you're resting, I understand. My point is, what happens at the end of life? The end of life, nowadays, it's dignity with death, euthanasia, mercy killings, whatever they call it, whatever fancy name they come up with. The Jews are standing there screaming, leave the guy alone. Don't unplug him. He's alive. He's breathing. He has a soul. Let God take the soul, not you. Rabbi, he's not being productive. He's just a vegetable lying in bed. Or he doesn't even have to be a vegetable anymore. He's just being a little bit of pain. Or just old. Grandma's old. She's spilling things and she keeps on falling and she's breaking her hips and her knees. What's the point? Let her die with dignity. That's what it's come to now. I teach this in Hebrew High. I'm telling you. The stories, the statistics, they're mind-boggling. There's a 12-year-old kid in the Netherlands who got the doctor to kill him. Against his parents' wishes, he was able to convince the doctor to take his life. So it's so fascinating that we can spend a whole life not really caring about the level of productivity like the way Jews do. And yet when it comes to the end, suddenly the Jews say, if the person is breathing, he's being productive, leave him alone. And everybody else says, no, that's not productive. Come on, he's just breathing. He's lying in the bed, not doing anything. Pull the plug. It's weird. That's my introduction. Yes. Got a question? Oh, okay. You sighed. I thought you had a question. Okay, so let's go on to birth. Partners in creation. The Talmud tells us that there are 3 partners in the creation of every human being. Mother, Father, and, you guessed it, the Lord above. Without him, nothing happens. How complicated is it to create a child? Well, to create a child, especially to create a healthy child, is not as simple as we have become accustomed to. Just last week actually a week ago, Wednesday, I was at UCLA Hospital, neonatal ICU, to visit a young couple from here, just had their first child, and complications, and a hole in the heart, and missing a chromosome 17, and something like this, and that. And when you're in that ward, and you're looking around, these are all children born with something wrong with them. So we take life for granted, we take birth for granted. Oh yeah, baby, mazel tov, boy, girl. Oh, she was hoping for a boy, it's a girl. Okay, fine, next one. It's like, this is the gift of life that is so incredible, that God allows us to become God-like and to procreate. Essentially, he's saying to us, and more to the woman than to the man, but it's both together, is, I'm giving you the ability to emulate me, to bring life into the world. We all remember when that U.S. Airways plane landed on the Hudson River, Captain Sullenberg, right? I remember hearing afterwards, I think it was a pilot speaking on the radio, but how many things had to go right that day to make that landing happen. And had one of those things not gone exactly, that miracle on the Hudson never would have happened. It wasn't just a matter of, all right, I guess the engines are up, here we go, we're coming in for landing. He was talking about the weather, the angle, the wings. I mean, it was just amazing, the aerodynamics. So many things had to come together for a child to be born. Without going to a whole biology lesson. How many things have to happen perfectly at the right moment, the right second, for a child to be born, let alone to have a healthy child? So what is birth? Birth is God's way of saying, you matter, you count. We talked about this a few weeks ago at the Shabbos class. I won't repeat the whole thing. How do you teach self-esteem? Not by screaming, I am somebody, but by lighting a Shabbos candle for a child and telling them, you are the cause of there being more light in the world. This one little idea, that birth is God's way of saying you matter, otherwise you wouldn't be here, is an incredible idea. Now, I don't know if the public schools are allowed to teach that, because notice I said it's God's way of saying you matter, and we can't mention his name in public school. But maybe we can figure out another way to get that message across. That if you're alive, you matter. The world needs you. You have what to contribute. Let's move on to the case for bris, brit, and brit milah. Those are all the same things. The word brit in Hebrew means a circumcision, or actually literally means a covenant, known as the covenant of Abraham. Milah means a circumcision. Brit milah, therefore, is the covenant of circumcision. If your dialect is Sephardic Hebrew, you pronounce it as a brit. If you're Ashkenazic Hebrew, you say, I'm going to a bris. But it's exactly the same affair. Bris or brit. Doesn't make a difference. So what's up with this bris? And why does God want us to have a bris? It seems somewhat barbaric. Take this poor little kid, and against his will, or at least it seems that way, we're causing him unnecessary pain, let alone the emotional pain that the parents go through. I've never seen a mother yet stand at a baby's bris and not bawl. It's impossible. So what is it that God wants from us? Why is this so important? Now, it's interesting that historically, whenever the Jews have been subjected to foreign rule that has been anti-Jewish, bris has always been one of the favorite targets to try to ban. Now, why are they so? What do they care? I can understand they say, no, you have to work on Shabbos. We need productivity 7 days a week. No more going home early Friday afternoon. That's not going to happen. Okay, it's ruining the economy, so at least they think, right? Fine. But what do you care if I have a bris? It bothers you. So they come, of course, under the pretense of it's barbaric. The child doesn't have. No, it's not the way. They tried a few years ago in San Francisco also, if you remember, to start banning bris, and even nowadays in Europe and in certain countries, they are trying. What is it about bris that's so threatening to these people that they always want to ban it? The Greeks banned it back in the times of Hanukkah, before the miracle of Hanukkah. So it's interesting, we are told that the word Brit is an oath. An oath means a sign or a witness. It's an eternal witness that we are connected, we have a relationship with God. Now there are two other commandments in the Torah that also have the same term associated with them. One is Shabbos. Shabbos is referred to as an oath. Oti beini ubeinechem. It's a sign or it's a testimony between me and you. And the other one is tefillin. For tefillin it says, you should bind them as a sign upon your hand. Incidentally, this is one of the reasons.
Is the rainbow from the story of Noah, did they use the same word for that covenant?
I believe so. It's a note, except that that's not a mitzvah. It's a fact. God is saying that will be a reminder, for the story that happened. But specifically for the mitzvah, you have these three things. So we know that the tefillin are not put on Shabbos. Why not? So it says that how is anything held up in a court of law? You have to have two witnesses. So what is the Jew's proof that he's connected to God? He has two witnesses. So we're talking about males right now, not about females. For the male, he has a bris. That's one oath, one sign. And he puts on tefillin. That's his second sign. Comes Shabbos, and Shabbos claims, hey, I'm a witness, I'm a sign. So now you only need two, you don't need all three. Well, you can't get rid of the circumcision every Saturday. So you can stop putting on tefillin for one day. So that's actually one of the reasons it says why we don't put tefillin on Shabbos, is because the witness, the testimony that is necessary is not needed on Shabbos because you have Shabbos and the bris. The way I explain it to the Bar Mitzvah boys, we don't get that complicated. We just say very simply, I give the analogy of when you go off to college, right? And your mom says, call every day. Let me know that you're okay. Give me a call in the morning. I just want to hear from you. And when you come home from college, you don't have to call anymore, right? You're home. Shabbos, the Jewish home. The Jew is at home. He's at home with God, and therefore doesn't need to make that call anymore. Doesn't need the tefillin, or as I say, the tefillin is really the word telephone. The letters are rearranged. So what about this number 8? Number 8, if you hang out at Chabad long enough, you'll know that number 8 is very special. Get the 8 ball, right? What's so special about number 8? The cycle of the world revolves around the number 7. 7 days in a week. The following week is the first day of the next week. 8, therefore, represents something which is beyond or above the norm, above nature. Transcends the norm. In Jewish life, we have a number of things associated with the number 8. The first one is the bris. Some of the others are some of the holidays that have 8 days, like Simchat Torah ends up being the 8th day of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, Simchat Torah. The 8th day of Pesach, at least if you're outside of Israel, there's 8 days. In Israel, it's only 7 days. Number 8. Each of these days carries with it a very, very supernal spiritual understanding that it goes beyond the norm. Simchat Torah, you'll know it's not a regular day. It's not just another day of Sukkot. The dancing, the exuberance of Simchat Torah is beyond. And it's all associated with the number 8 transcending the normal laws of nature. And that's the same with the bris as well. What God is essentially saying to the Jewish people by the bris is, I am making a covenant with you that will transcend nature. Nature is 7. We're going to opt for 8. And that's why the bris is not happening as it does in the Muslim religion when the child is 13 years old and he has the option of, well, I don't know if he has any options there, but theoretically, I guess, he would have the option of saying, I don't want to go ahead with the bris. In the Jewish religion, you're not asked. 8 days. So that's what drives people crazy. How can you do it to a kid? That's the point. The whole point of the bris is that it's happening to you because that bond is so internalized and so eternal and innate with God that the connection is so strong. I mean, imagine if someone would say to you, and the way the world's going, they may say this sooner than later, you know, you need to ask your child if he wants you as his parent. It's really unfair. I mean, you decided to bring a kid into the world, but why is he stuck with you? So therefore, when the kid, we're probably going there soon, right? When he turns 10 years old or whatever the age will be determined, you'll have to take him to the court of law and he'll have to say, yes, I want to be with your mom and dad, or he'll say, no, not interested. Or I'm going to somebody else's house. It hasn't happened yet, but it may.
I think there have been some lawsuits.
Yeah, disowning their parents? Okay, there you go. Well, with God, he says, you can't disown me. I'm sorry. He says, you are brished, you are circumcised, and you're stuck with me. And this transcends logic and transcends everything rational. Now, what is it about that specific area of the body? So some people say that the whole point is that God wants us to elevate the animalistic world. The world has got spirituality in it, we know that, but then there's the mundane parts of the world. And therefore the area where the circumcision takes place represents the most animalistic drive of man, and that needs to be elevated for a godly reason, and thus will hopefully continue throughout the person's life the idea, the notion that my job here, beyond having animalistic pleasures, is to elevate life as well. Tonight's class is not about intimacy and romance. That's for tomorrow night, for the lecture of Rabbi Friedman, but you can come there and you can hear how you can do that with intimacy and romance and elevate that in a godly manner as well. But that's what some commentaries say. That's why this particular part of the body was chosen for the bris. Others say because that is the organ of procreation, and God is trying to connect you to Him as well as to all future generations. The idea that the Jewish people continue on, and therefore the bris kind of brings it all. It unites us all as one nation. The bris, as I mentioned, is on the 8th day, and what's interesting is there is a law that says you cannot draw blood on Shabbos. We're obviously not talking about life and death. We talked about that a few weeks ago. But in general, if a person has an elective surgery coming up, or even if it's not elective but it's not an emergency, you should not do the surgery on Shabbos. Okay? What about a bris? You're going to be drawing blood, obviously. The answer is that a bris is so holy, so special, so sacred, that it overrides even Shabbos. Now, make a few disclaimers. That doesn't mean that you can do everything at the bris. Like, it means you can have a photographer or a band. You still have to keep Shabbos. In fact, the mohel is supposed to have all his needs there. He usually comes to town for Shabbos. He can't just drive up on Shabbos and say, well, you needed me. Everything has to be set. If the bris usually takes place in the house, but if the bris is going to be in a shul and the baby has to be transported, then you got to figure out a way to get the baby there on Shabbos with somebody who's not Jewish, and even there, not taking the baby in a car, just pushing them or whatever. There's different laws relating to that. But the point is, the actual bris can be performed on Shabbos, but the accessory things that have to take place all need to be done before Shabbos. And that, again, is only when it's on the 8th day. There's something very special, unique about the 8th day. In the case where the bris is postponed due to jaundice or any other illness, and then you say, all right, it's 2 weeks later, let's have it on Saturday. It's very convenient for the family. Everybody's off from work. Can't do it. You got to wait till Sunday. Only works when it's on the actual 8th day. Another interesting halakha, Jewish law, is, and again, if I mention this at the Shabbos class, please stop me. what happens when a baby is born on Friday evening, in that period of time, like the twilight zone hour between candlelighting and nightfall. Did we mention this at Shabbos? No? Okay, so we know that the Jewish calendar turns at nightfall when it gets dark outside, right? That's when we flip the calendar, it's tomorrow. So for example, if there is a baby born right now, it's Wednesday night, but as far as Judaism is concerned, Thursday has begun. So the baby's bris would be next week, Thursday, meaning tomorrow would be day 1, and therefore the following Thursday is day number 8. Okay? If the baby was born today at 5 o'clock, before sundown, the bris would be next week, Wednesday. So it's just a matter of a few hours. The question is, what happens if the baby was born today at, let's say, 6 o'clock, because I think sundown was around 5:40 or 5:45 or something like that, and the darkness is not until 6:11 today, so if the baby's born right smack in the middle, on a Friday, when do you do the bris? Now, why is this complicated? This is where you got to love Jewish law, okay? Even the rabbis were not certain which day that period of time belonged to. Does it belong to Friday, or does it belong to Saturday? So true, you already lit your candles and you already ushered in the Shabbat, that's true. But you could have done that an hour ago as well. That doesn't mean that it's Saturday. Friday, you can light candles even an hour before the time on the calendar. So when the baby is born at 6 o'clock, if the actual day that he was born on is considered to be Friday, then when should his bris be? The following Friday, right? However, since we're not sure, it's possible that that 45-minute period actually belongs to Saturday. When should his bris be? Following Saturday, right? Shabbos. The problem with that is you can only do a bris on Shabbos if it's the actual 8th day. But for all you know, this might be the 9th day because you're not really sure if those 45 minutes are Friday or Saturday. So now you're really stuck. You can't do a bris on the 7th day, which might be Friday. With me? Did I lose you?
So who makes the decision?
Who makes it? The rabbis, guess. And the answer is you do it on Sunday.
Really?
It's a great trivia question, by the way. You do it on Sunday so that all your problems are solved. It's not the 7th and it's not the 9th.
Only if you're born in that...
Only in that very small period of time, right?
Could you deliver a baby in Yom Kippur?
You deliver the baby whenever the baby comes. You don't tell the mother, hold on. I was told by a friend of a couple in Brooklyn that lives very close to the hospital. And on Shabbos, the mother said, I'm not going to take a taxi, I'm going to walk. And the baby was born somewhere on 49th Street or something. So if it's Yom Kippur, a friend of mine in Mishavia had a baby a few years ago on Yom Kippur. The bris is on Yom Kippur. Obviously, the food takes place at night. There's no eating. Doesn't override the fast. You can do a bris, but you can't eat.
And if you do a bris on Shabbos,
Right.
do you do it in the morning before services?
Typically, if they do it either in the middle of services before Musaf, or they do it, usually it happens at the end. So, and usually it's done at the people's home. Services are over, everybody goes there for lunch. I think Rabbi Bryski had a son who was born either on a holiday or on a Shabbos. I think it was a Shabbos. Because I remember walking here once on a Shabbos for a bris. So some of the interesting halachas surrounding bris and Shabbos and the 8th day. A baby is named at the bris, which again underscores its importance, its significance. Although very often people will tell you from the moment the baby is born or even before that what his name is or going to be. In traditional circles, we don't divulge the baby's name until the actual bris. Even when everyone knows what the baby's name is going to be. My father passed away a few weeks later. A nephew was born. What happened to there we go. So we kind of all knew that the baby would be named for my father, and I was the one who had to name him. but I still turned to the father of the child and said, what's the name? Because it's not for me to decide the name, it's for you. You have to call it. The rabbis tell us that parents are imbued with Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, when they choose the child's name. So we think we're picking names out of a hat, or we were on vacation here, we like this, we're going to call you kid this, that, the other, all these different things. The reality is, it says that it's a moment of divine inspiration because this soul is connected to that name. Every soul gets matched up with its name. That's why, incidentally, God forbid, if somebody is very ill, they very often will add a name, change a name. And the reason behind that is, the thinking is, that if God forbid this name and this soul are destined for something really bad, then perhaps if we infuse the soul with a new name, a new burst of energy, then maybe there'll be a new lease on life. That's why they do that. So the names are important, the bris is important, and the truth is every subject on this paper is a class for itself. I mean, I did a class early in the year called Birth and Childhood where the whole night we talked about this. So each thing we can go off in a lot of tangents, but we got a lot to cover here tonight. Okay, last paragraph on page number 1. So, and again, we mentioned this in the Shabbos class. I remember talking about the idea why bread doesn't grow on trees. The answer is wheat grows, and it's our job to grind the wheat, to mix the ingredients, and to make bread. And that's actually in the final word of the Kiddush that we say, in the final word of the 6 days of creation. It says la'asot, which means it says that the Lord created the world in 6 days, la'asot, so that it should be made. The grammar there doesn't make any sense. Asher bara Elokim la'asot. It's past tense and then present or future tense mixed together. And the meaning is that God created a world, but then He left it up for us to finish the work. So He doesn't want to give everything on a silver platter. He wants us to take the wheat to grind into bread. As for the question, why didn't God create man already circumcised? The answer is because God wants us to feel that we have a responsibility to improve His creation of the world. And this is one of the things that's represented by bris. That we're not perfect until we have a bris. So it's an act of completion. It's not an act of mutilation at all. Just the opposite. You're not mutilating the body. The way we see it, the way Torah sees it is, you're completing the body. It's incumbent upon the person, if the child was not circumcised by his parents, to see to it that he gets circumcised himself when he is old enough to realize that. Fellow in Montreal told me this story a few years ago. He was in Israel, and he met a gentleman there who was in his 80s, a Russian gentleman who had a bris. And he was blown away by this. This guy was like, I think 87 years old or something like that. And he asked him, he said, what possessed you at this age to get a bris? And the guy just said, I realize I don't have much time left in this world. And sooner or later, I'm going to get up there. And I don't want to be detached from my parents, my grandparents, and my forefathers. They all had bris. What am I going to do? I had to get a bris before I die. And in fact, it's a big thing. A lot of the Russian Jews who have come over the years, many of them, have their bris as adults because they never had the opportunity as children in Russia. Also, I should point out that a bris should be done by someone who knows what he's doing. It's not just a circumcision done by a doctor, even though he's a wonderful doctor and he's a urologist. But there's a lot of holiness, there are prayers, and there are certain parts of the bris that doctors do not do, that the rabbi who's a mole does do. And so you're dealing with an expert, and therefore one should always seek out somebody. Not that a doctor can't be a mole. In fact, we had a doctor living in our community for many years, Dr. Tenenbaum, who was an OBGYN and specifically went to learn how to become a mole because he was frustrated with many of his patients who didn't want to trust a rabbi. They wanted a doctor. And he knew that the doctors were doing it, it wasn't a kosher bris. So he had the benefits of being both a moel and a doctor, and now he lives in Muncie where there's a lot more business for OBGYNs than there is out here. Okay, now, what about women? We're talking all about bris. What about women? How do they fall into this whole discussion? Or do they? So it's interesting. We find in the 6 days of creation, it says if you follow the pattern, we go from the least important to the more important. We go from the inanimate to the vegetation, all the way to the animal kingdom, and eventually to the human species. Beginning with the man, and the last thing that God creates is the woman. Meaning we've gone up. We're going up from day one, we go up till we get to woman. So, as I'm sure, again, you've heard this notion a lot of times, this idea discussed at Chabad before, how a woman is perceived in traditional Judaism, more spiritual than the man, exempt from many of the rudimentary commandments that a man is obligated to do. The analogy I like to give is, think of a man being born halfway or at the foot of the mountain, has to make his way up, and the woman is born halfway up the mountain, so there's no need for her to go down and start climbing all over again. She's already halfway up. Many of the commandments that we as men were given were meant to connect us to God. Tefillin is a perfect example. Yarmulke is another example. Why doesn't a woman wear a yarmulke? The yarmulke is there to make you aware that there's a God in the world. A woman is aware of it naturally. She has a baby. She knows there's a God in the world. The intuition of the woman, the female, the rabbis tell us she's more spiritual than the male is. And therefore many of these commandments are tools given to us men that we require to climb our personal mountain, our journey to get closer to God. The woman doesn't need it. The Talmud considers a woman as if she was born circumcised. In other words, obviously we're not talking biologically, we're talking in a spiritual sense. Whatever is achieved by the man's circumcision, all these beautiful ideas that we mentioned before, the woman is born with them already, part and parcel of her DNA. And that's why she doesn't have a similar process to the man. Now again, in the wonderful world that we live in today, where everything is upside down, so as we'll talk about soon, a boy's bar mitzvah is at 13 and a girl's is at 12, because girls mature earlier. So we make sure to tell girls, no, you're just as dumb as the boys, you have to wait till you're 13 also. And now they're doing things with the girls also. Give the girl a bris-like ceremony. Don't just name her at the Torah. She has to have a ceremony that is akin to a bris, with whatever it is that they do. Like, hello? You were born blessed. You were born on a spiritual plateau. Why are you running down the mountain? You're already there. But that's what happens when the truth is not good enough, I guess. Okay. It says that I mentioned the mitzvahs that women are exempt from typically are referred to as the mitzvahs that pertain to a certain time. And I'm sure you've heard this in the past 8 weeks at a number of the classes, Living Judaism, that if there's a mitzvah that there's a time restraint, a woman is exempt. Man's job is to conquer and to elevate time. That's our job. Women are not looking to conquer anything. They conquer their husbands, that's all they have to do. They're good. And they elevate time because of who they are. I just had this discussion this morning with somebody who was at Rabbi Bryski's lunch class. I was putting on tefillin, and a woman came up to me and said, I want to ask you a question. Why do women put on tefillin? And the answer very simply is because when do men typically put on tefillin? In the morning. They go to services, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. What's the mother doing at that time usually? Nurturing the children, waking them up, feeding them breakfast, cuddling them, praying with them, doing all the wonderful things, right? What's more important? Running to shul to have a cup of coffee and to daven, or to stay at home with the kids?
Stay home with the kids.
I think so, and traditionally you think so. Because you're raising the next generation of Jews. Meanwhile, but the only way the woman can accomplish that is by kicking the husband out of the house. You go down, you go to shul, you go conquer, you get out of here. Just take an hour and get lost, and I'll take care of everything. Okay, let's move on. Last two things on the page. We're told that in every single bris, Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Novi, attends in spirit. We have the famous chair where we place the baby down on the chair of Elijah. Does anybody know the reason for that? Why he comes to every bris? It's an interesting story. Nobody? Never heard the explanation? Or you forgot? Okay. So the explanation is that Elijah the prophet, whom we always perceive as this elderly gentleman with a long white beard and kind eyes and gentle, and your grandfather, right? Just the nicest, sweetest guy, right? He's actually a tough cookie. If you read the Tanakh, he didn't take no for an answer, and he stood up for his principles, and he called it as it was. And he was not afraid to walk up to the king, Ahab, Achav, and the wonderful wife, Queen Jezebel, and to tell them exactly what he thought of them, what God thought of them. And they chased him, they wanted to kill him, and at some point, Eliyahu Navi turns to God and he says, God, with all due respect, your people, they're like, they've abandoned your mitzvah, they've abrogated your commandments, they're a bunch of losers. Tanakh tells us that he was able, I think, there were like 7,000 people, if I'm not mistaken, is the number that rallied behind him. And everybody else was against him. Imagine that. Okay? And God, of course, God is the typical parent. The parent is always yelling at his kid, but the moment you say, you should keep your kid quiet, excuse me, mind your own business, right? Tell me how to raise my children. I say, you were just yelling at the kid. I'll yell at my kid, but you don't come here and tell me I'm not a good parent, right? So the moment Eliyahu says to God, your kids have abrogated your commandments, God says, how dare you speak that way about my precious children? And therefore you shall have to come to every single bris to testify that in fact they are keeping my covenant with Abraham. And that's why his spirit arrives at every single bris. It's one of the reasons, by the way, there's an old traditional thing that we don't invite people to a bris. Now, how else they're going to show up if they don't invite them, right? So traditionally, we inform people of the bris. Say, hi Lisa, I just want to let you know we're having a bris tomorrow at 8 o'clock. But I don't say you're invited. What's so terrible if I say you're invited? Because then if you can't come, it just doesn't look good. Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet came and you're not there. You're so busy you couldn't show up because the prophet himself is coming. So therefore we don't invite, we just inform. Just a little workaround so we don't embarrass you. Okay? And finally, the last thing we're going to do with bris is the difference between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic customs for naming a child. Anybody familiar with that one?
Sephardic name it after the living?
Correct. And Ashkenazi after the deceased. Right. And what do you do if you have a mixed marriage? Good luck. The answer is you name it for the living Sephardic parent. You don't ever name it you don't ever say to your mother, listen, I know you're Ashkenazi, my husband's Sephardic, so we're naming it for you. Whoa, yeah. Don't ever try that one. Why is that?
Why
The differences?
Yeah.
Good question. I'm not sure when it started, but in the Ashkenazi circles, it's considered a great honor to name after the person. It's like you connect to their soul. In the Sephardic tradition, the greatest honor is when the person can be alive and see his prodigy, his grandchild, being named for him. It's a really big deal for them. So, I guess it's like a lot of other things. I don't know when it all started. I think what it does say is we're not dealing here with laws. Okay? It's not a law. This is a tradition that started, even though many people are very hung up on this. You know what I mean? Like, you would never want to name your Ashkenazi child after a living parent because you'll never hear the end of it. But then the Sephardic is the opposite. So, but again, it's not a law. Your question?
Oh, I was just going to say, it sounds like if we're respecting one or the other, the living are going to be a little bit more upset if you don't respect the dead. Won't notice so much.
Yeah, but the dead always has a child who's furious that you didn't name for my mother. And let me tell you, that goes a very long way.
I'm not saying you can't get dizzy trying to figure it out. I'm just trying to make some kind of sense.
Yeah, I hear you. Now, people are very particular.
Yeah.
My mother had 2 names, you only gave 1 name.
Yeah.
Or you gave 3 names, she only had 2 names, and this, that, the other. There's a famous story they tell of a couple who came to the rabbi. It was the night before the bris, and they said, Rabbi, we know we're supposed to have this divine inspiration. We heard about it, but we just can't agree on a name. He said, well, what's the problem? The husband said, I would love to name the child for my father. The wife said, I want to name him for my father. Okay, we got a little predicament. There is a system, if you look at the Conejo Jewish law, what you're supposed to follow, but whatever. So the rabbi says, okay, so what was your father's name? He says, it was Moshe. He looks at the wife, what was your father's name? It was Moshe. He says, what's the problem? That sounds like a no-brainer. So she says, no, but his father was a good for nothing. My father was a saint. I want a name for my father, not for his father. You'll never win with Jewish parents. Okay, there is a custom. Again, not a law in the Torah. A custom, it's called page 2. It's called Upshernish. Hebrew, it's called Tisporet. Some of you have probably attended them before. It's a cute little thing. It stems from one verse in the Torah where it says that man is like a tree in the field. And there are a lot of laws in the Torah, as I'm sure you are familiar with trees and fruits. For the first 3 years, you're not supposed to gather the fruit. Just leave them alone. And so similarly, some people follow the custom. It's not universal by all Orthodox Jews, by the way. It's primarily by Hasidic Jews and certain sectors of the Orthodox community as well, but certainly not by all. That for the first 3 years, they don't cut their little boy's hair. They let it grow as long as it goes. On the third birthday, they make a party. They cut the hair. They give the kid his first yarmulke. They give him his first pair of tzitzit, his fringes. And the community comes together, everybody gets a little chance to snip the hair, and it's really seen as a formal introduction to his Jewish upbringing. Of course, it's not really, because it started way before. Kids already taught things at an earlier age, but that's the official time. And in fact, it usually is, it segues into another tradition which most people are not familiar with, because it happens typically the following day, and that is they take the child on the morning after he has his first haircut. They take him to school. And usually I'm not talking about kindergarten or preschool. I'll take him, let's say, to the first grade class, and he's brought in, wrapped up in a tallis, and the kids are given little candies in advance, not hard candy, soft candy, which they throw at him. And the idea is that the Torah becomes associated with sweetness, with candy. And they tell the child that these are candies that are being thrown at him from the angels in heaven. And the Rebbe takes him on his lap, and he studies with him a few lines of the alphabet or of the Chumash, of the Torah, whatever, and there's a whole party. And the point is, now that you're 3 years old, you're a big boy, you're wearing your yarmulke, you're wearing your tzitzis, and now we can formally begin to introduce you to the words of Torah and see how sweet it is. It's just one of the really cool, nice things that we do with kids, and one of the ways that we make sure that they know who they are and they have a solid identity. Okay, bar and bat mitzvah. When you turn 13 years old, for a boy you become bar mitzvah. For a girl, when you turn 12, you are bat mitzvah. Even if you don't step foot into any temple, into any shul, even if you don't do anything, you are hereby bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. It's basically you've reached the age. That's what it is. Anyone who tells you I'm 54 years old, I never had a bar mitzvah, that means they were never called to the Torah, they never put on tefillin, but their bar mitzvah took place when they turned 13. It's like saying, I never had a sweet 16. Okay, you missed it, but you did turn 16, right? You missed that birthday, right? So go have a party now, we don't care. But all right. So typically, how is a bar mitzvah celebrated or commemorated? By being called to the Torah for a boy, we'll talk about the girls in a minute, and putting on the tefillin, which then becomes something which we hope you'll do every day of your life, with the exception of Shabbos. Very good. Okay, and the Jewish holidays, the main holidays.
So if the bar mitzvah is on Shabbos, they put tefillin on the next day?
Yeah. Actually, the truth is, we begin usually with the kids a few weeks before, just to get them trained in the spirit of it. But the first formal day would be Sunday, yeah. And you can do this anytime. Anytime in any place. A few weeks ago, I was doing my Friday route where I visit Jewish offices in Westlake Village. trying to encourage the men to put on film, giving out these little pamphlets, the scrolls, which I'm sure you've seen lying around here, and giving out candles to the girls, women. And I came into a dentist who's one of the offices I visit every week, and he was busy with a patient, and I didn't really think he would want to be putting his film on while he's got the drill in the mouth like that. There might be a lawsuit over there. So as I was about to leave, one of the women sitting in the lobby said to me, Shabbat Shalom. So I said, you're Jewish? I handed her the scroll, and we started chatting, and it turned out she goes to Chabad down in the valley. And suddenly the door opens up, and a bunch of kids walk in, and she introduces them as, this is my nephew and my nieces. And I saw the nephew was a pretty tall kid, so I figured he was already over 13. I said to him, did you put on film today? And he said, never did in my life. I said, what about your bar mitzvah? He said, never had a bar mitzvah. I said, would you like one? He said, I'd love it. I said, stand up. And right there and then in the dentist's lobby, we had a little bar mitzvah. It was interesting because he read the Shema and the V'ahavta paragraph flawlessly. I said, how do you read Hebrew so well? He said, I went to Hebrew school at my temple. I said, and they never made a bar mitzvah. Never made a bar mitzvah. I don't know why. Not my business. But 5 minutes later, his grandmother walks in. I said, why didn't they tell me? I would have waited 5 minutes. You could have seen your grandson have a bar mitzvah. And it was luckily the aunt had taken a video. Interesting. So the grandmother was telling me, you called her husband, right? Tell me, you don't believe what just happened. I forgot what the kid's name was. Just had a bar mitzvah in the dentist's office. A rabbi. You're talking about it. Yeah, exactly right. In fact, before I left, I went over to the dentist to say good Shabbos, and I said, I know you can't put on film today, but don't worry, we had a bar mitzvah in your lobby while you're busy over here.
The dentist bill for it?
I had in charge of that. So it was interesting what the grandmother told me. And I'm not exaggerating. I had her repeat this 3 times because I didn't believe it the first 2 times. She said, she was from Israel and her parents come from Russia. They were socialists. And she said to me that her father, if he knew the piece of meat was kosher, would not eat it. I said, yeah, you mean like if it wasn't kosher? She said, no. If it was kosher, he wouldn't eat it. And I had to repeat it a 3rd time. I thought she was making it up. She goes, no, he was a socialist. He was so anti-religion that if you told him the piece of meat is kosher, he would not eat it. And now his grandson, his great-grandson, is having a bar mitzvah in a dentist's office. Okay, so now, it's interesting. Very briefly, we talk about souls. Part of the celebration of our mitzvah, it says that when a child is conceived, souls begin to migrate towards him. What we call the Yetzer Tov, the good soul, the Yetzer Hara, the evil soul. And whereas the Yetzer Hara seems to be fully present almost from the get-go, from the moment of birth, the Yetzer Tov, the balancing good soul, takes its time and kind of hovers around the person and begins to develop its relationship slowly. It comes to full access, or what would you say? Fruition, or it docks fully when the kid turns 13 years old. That's part of the celebration of 13, is because he now has full usage or full inspiration of his good soul, his Yetzer HaTov.
So 12 for a girl.
12 for a girl, right. Now, what's interesting is there's a prayer that's called Tachnun. Tachnun are, on Yom Kippur we do all these bang, 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 all that, right? Call it the penitential prayers, whatever they're called, right? The English word is penance, right? Penance. So Pentecostal? No, they call it, whatever. It's all the sins, the confession. So we say a very small part of that every single day at our prayers, in the morning and the afternoon. It's a very small version of the Yom Kippur. Now, we don't go through the whole long list. However, if you are at a baby's bris, and there's a service going on, or the service is happening after, the bris is happening after the service, you don't say the confessions. Why? Because there's a bris, it's a joyous occasion, it overrides, and the confessions are like too, negative or whatever, so you don't say them. You're overtaken with the joy of the bris. It says, forgives you for all your sins. Similarly, if you're at a wedding, or if for 1 week after the wedding, the groom is present at the service, you also are exempt from saying those confessional prayers. What about a bar mitzvah? It seems like a pretty decent occasion to me. Kid turned 13, putting on film. So at least in Ashkenazic circles, I'm not sure about Sephardic, I think Sephardic perhaps doesn't, but in Ashkenazic circles, we do say the tachnun with the confessional prayers. Why? So the answer that's given is because even though the bar mitzvah is a great celebration, it's also coming with a tremendous responsibility. When a child is born, he's not yet obligated to do anything. You encourage him to follow the commandments, you train him, but he has zero obligation. When he turns 13 or 12, now you hand him the book and you say, buddy, here's the manual, it's all yours, get to work. You've been loafing around long enough, now it's yours, okay? That, the Rebbe tells us, is not really a cause for celebration. I mean, it is, but it also comes with a tremendous responsibility. And therefore the joy is balanced or tempered somewhat with the sense of responsibility that takes place now, and therefore the tachnun is not omitted because it's not fully joyous, it's somewhat subdued because this kid's got a lot to do. In fact, there's a prayer that is said at the Torah that the father of the child says. Anybody know what that prayer is at the day of the bar mitzvah? Familiar with that one? Right after the boy has his first aliyah, his first getting called to the Torah, he says the blessings, and at the end of the blessings, the father says, Baruch, blessed are you, Shaftarani me'ayne shalazeh. Thank you, God, blessed are you, God, who has freed me from this punishment. Yeah, that's what it says. I'm not making it up. Now, what does that mean? What it means is not that the kid is no longer beholden to his parent, and not that the parent can no longer take them off as a dependent on the income tax. But what it means is that the child needs to understand that from this day on, he is now responsible for his actions. Now again, it doesn't mean that parents are let off the hook, but the kid needs to understand that you can't play this blame game, my daddy, my mommy. No, you're an adult as far as we're concerned. If we're counting you for the minyan, if we're counting you as an adult, it's not just a game. Oh, you're 13 and we'll make you a party. If you're an adult, we expect you to live up to that. So that's why the father says this blessing of not that the kid is a punishment, but I'm no longer responsible. I'm not liable for his actions. That's what the meaning of the blessing is. One more thing I want to point out about the boy's bar mitzvah, and that is, there is no commandment at all that says that a child has to read Hebrew or that he has to read from the Torah. You can get called to the Torah and read the Aliyah transliterated. Technically, you can even do it in English, but I've never seen anyone do that because they have the prayer written out in English, Baruch. Okay, this notion of the kid has to read Hebrew and he has to do the Haftorah. The Haftorah is at the end of the reading. There's a Haftorah. I once had a boy sit look at me and he said, "Rabbi, I cannot read half the Torah. I just don't." So this whole idea of the kid reading, one aliyah, two aliyahs, and all this stuff, it's beautiful, it's sweet, it's wonderful, but it's really the parents getting their money's worth for day school. That's all it really is. Or showing off to the neighbor, my kid can do a few more pages than your kid can. There is no obligation. In fact, in some of the very, very orthodox circles, they decry reading from the Torah because they consider it to be not the best usage of time. Let him better sit and study rather than sitting there for months and months. I'm like, Baruch. Oh, okay, I got it. Yeah. So in fact, this past November, I was at the Chabad convention in New York, and there was this workshop on bar mitzvahs, and I went to it, and they had 3 presenters. 2 of the 3, the first 2 got up, one of them said he doesn't even do bar mitzvahs on Shabbos anymore. So I was like, are you serious? He said, oh, I do mine on Sunday. The kid leads the service. He gets called to the Torah on an alternate day, like whenever the Torah is read on Monday or Thursday, on a Shabbos. It's not the fanfare of the whole family and the whole thing. So Sunday bar mitzvah, he puts on film. He explains what Judaism is all about. He leads the service. And it's a very educational ceremony without involving this Torah reading. I said, that would never fly in my community. Sure enough, I come back to town, and this guy calls me up. Rabbi, my son's having a bar mitzvah. Wonderful. When? In 5 weeks. He didn't say. He actually said it's going to be in December. I said 2018. He goes, no, 2017. I said, it'll be like in 5 weeks. He goes, yeah. I said, let me guess. Your kid doesn't read Hebrew. He goes, no, he doesn't. Okay, but you want it to read from, yeah, of course it's read from the Torah. Anyway, it was a disaster. I should close the microphone. But he couldn't do it. And at the very end, unfortunately, I had to tell the kid, I had to apologize. I said, I'm sorry. What we ended up doing was he got called to the Torah for the Aliyah. He then read the portion that he was supposed to have read from the Torah. He read it from a piece of paper with, in English. So he wasn't actually reading from the Torah, but because he had worked so hard, I felt bad, so I let him read it. And then after the whole thing, the father said to me, yeah, like, why did you spend so much time teaching him to read from the Torah? You just should have taught him what it means to be a Jew. Okay? So, of course, I encouraged the boy to come to my bar mitzvah class, and he said he'd love to. He hasn't shown up yet. Okay, but anyway, part of the question. Huh?
Yeah.
He's too traumatized now.
He's in therapy.
You know what? Okay, moving right along. So, regardless of when's bar mitzvah is, like if you want to push it off, if it's the summertime or you're going to the Western Wall, you can do that. That's all okay. But the 13th birthday itself should be marked. If it's a Monday or a Thursday or any other day when the Torah is read, Monday and Thursdays are the weekdays when the Torah gets read, in addition to Shabbos. However, if there's a holiday, the beginning of a month, Hanukkah, the Torah would be read on whatever day that is. So if that's the day of your 13th birthday, if it coincides with one of those days, the boy should come to services with his parents, get called to the Torah. If it's a non-Torah reading day, he should definitely come and put on tefillin and come at the first opportunity and get called to the Torah as well. What about a girl? What about a girl's bat mitzvah? Well, you can speak about that. You had a bat mitzvah at Chabad, right? The comments we usually get at Chabad when we do bat mitzvahs are, wow, this was the most meaningful bat mitzvah I've ever been to. The girl didn't copycat the boy. She actually did her own service that was tailor-made for her, and she explained everything, and she wasn't reading a bunch of mumble-jumble in Hebrew and no one knew what she was talking about, and she herself didn't know. She actually understood. She translated everything. It's a different service. It's intellectual. It's a lot of studying that goes on, and it's not mimicking what the cantor or the rabbi taught. It's actually internalizing the lessons and sharing them with everybody and explaining what the role of Jewish women is. Which, again, if we're on the same page for that, so we know that men and women were not created equal. We have different roles in the world, and that's what a girl does at her bar mitzvah. She explains why she's exempt from these mitzvahs. She explains why she's not reading from the Torah, not putting on tefillin, and what the mitzvahs of the women are. And she extols those virtues rather than tries to hide from them. So we kind of take the bull by the horns with the girls. And like I said, most people walk out enlightened and educated and well informed. And it's a pretty interesting service. Any questions before we go on to weddings? We're all good? Okay. Weddings. Well, we're not going to cover weddings A to Z, obviously. If you do, this is important for you guys. There's a great book. It's called The Jewish Wedding Guide by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. The name of the book is called Made in Heaven. Fantastic book. It has A to Z, what you need to know, from dating through the wedding. What's wonderful about this book is he spells everything out in simple to read and understand English. He gives you all of the customs. Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Hasidic, Orthodox, everything. It's a really phenomenal book. And we encourage every couple that are going into matrimony to read this, to know. One of the things we find very often is that people are very ignorant usually. And we live in an age of enlightenment where we have the most ignorant people around. It's a fact. With all of the social media and access to information and all the enlightenment that we have, we are the most ignorant generation around. So my wife and I will be sitting with, a boy and a girl, where they're getting married, and we'll say something. It's nice at the chuppah, the ceremony, to do this, and they go, "Oh, no, that's old-fashioned. We don't want to do that." Let me just explain the reason. That sounds actually very nice. I think we'd like to do that. Okay. And it only goes on. Oh, really? This is about women's lib? I thought it was putting the... No, actually it's boosting. Oh, it's boosting the woman. For sure I want to do that. So again, without going to all the different ideas that are done by a chuppah, I can only tell you that they're beautiful. You can obviously read them online. I'll just share one or two of them with you. If you go to an Orthodox ceremony, you will see the groom veiling the bride before they walk down to the chuppah. I heard a story once from a well-known rabbi on the East Coast was saying he was at a wedding and he happened to be standing right next to the aunt, and when the boy came to veil the girl, she said, "Oh, what an archaic ceremony. It was horrible. The veiling the poor girl, He turned around to her unabashedly and he said, "Ma'am, sorry, but if you're now visiting some, country, some foreign, whatever island, whatever, some tribal, you would think this is the most beautiful thing oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. Because it's your own, you just can't handle it." So why does the boy veil the girl? Yes?
To make sure that it's the woman he's supposed to marry.
But then he should unveil her.
To symbolize that it's not about...
So actually, I just want to point out that in some circles, when the girl gets down to the actual chuppah, in some place they actually have a custom of taking a peek under the veil to make sure it's still the same girl. Because of the story of Jacob and Rachel and Leah. Yeah. And even those that don't do it say, what are the chances that someone's going to jump at the white gown and come down? Well, you can ask Leah about that if you want to Rachel. But there is. So the biblical source for veiling the bride comes from Yitzchak and Rivka. That's the first recorded marriage in the Torah. The Torah tells us that when Yitzchak beheld Rivka, and the servant said to her, "This is my master Yitzchak," it says that she immediately veiled herself out of modesty. One of the explanations for that is that, when we give a ring to the girl, right? The boy gives the ring to the girl. And with her accepting the ring, he marries her. I should point out, by the way, that traditional Judaism doesn't sanction double ring ceremonies. If the girl wants to give a ring to the boy, she can do it when the ceremony is over. But the actual ceremony of the chuppah is done. It's not completed, but a good chunk of it is done when he gives her the ring and he says those magical words, "I am hereby consecrating you to me as a wife, according to the laws of Moses in Israel." If she trades a ring with him, then it becomes a trade. It's not good. It undermines the entire... I hate to use the word transaction, but it's not a very romantic word, but that's essentially, a marriage is a halachic transaction. That's what happens. So, the ring, we're very careful that the ring should be a simple ring and not necessarily, and not have a gem in it, diamond. You can give her a diamond ring as well, but the ring that he uses to marry her with should be a very simple ring. Why? The rabbis were very, very careful that everything has to be done above ground. And there can be no room for error. Meaning, I married him because of the diamond. And then I found out it was really cubic Z. I never would have married the bum. Well, are they now technically married or not? It's not a laughing matter. Because if she says, "I married him for the money," and then she finds out that he has no money, there's a big question as to whether that marriage is valid, because the condition of the marriage was basically not there. The old joke when someone's admiring the woman's diamond, and she goes, and they ask her, "Oh, this diamond is beautiful. What's the name of that diamond?" She goes, "Oh, it's called the Plotkin diamond." Never heard of that one. What's the Plotkin diamond? So it comes with a big curse. With a curse? Yeah, it's called Mr. Plotkin. So that's why in traditional weddings, they're very careful to give a very simple band, a gold band, no stones, no gems, so we know exactly the value of it. Along the same lines, it says that the reason the boy veils the girl is the understanding is, and the demonstration is, I'm not marrying you for your external beauty. It's for the inner qualities. Because the reality is, in 40, 50 years from now, you might not look like this anymore. We don't want any questions on, was this a good marriage or not? Because, he thought she's going to look like this for the rest of her life, right? So he covers her, but really what it really is, it's a beautiful, beautiful, intimate expression of love, saying, I'm marrying you for the beautiful person that you are. And not because you turned me on because of your eyes and this and that. And, simply put, I've officiated all types of chuppahs. And, when you officiate an Orthodox wedding, where the bride and the groom are very serious, and it's a very serious time, and they're just absorbing it all, you just feel a sense of sanctity under the chuppah. When you're standing under the chuppah, and the boy and girl are looking at each other, and they're giggling and they're laughing, and I was at a wedding recently with Rabbi Shlomo, and he finally said to the boy, could you please look at me? You got a whole life to look at her. Look at me now, okay? A wedding is a very serious time. It's a fun time, but it's also a very serious and a very, very holy time. The words for a man in Hebrew are ish, and a woman is called isha. You have these words written on your paper. I believe you have them in Hebrew as well, right? Okay, if you look closely, even if you don't read Hebrew, if you look closely at those two Hebrew words, you'll notice that two of the letters are common in both words, the aleph and the shin. The uncommon letters are the yud and the hey. When placed together, a yud and a hey make up the name of God. When removed from their respective words, when you're left just with the two common letters, the aleph and the shin, they spell fire. I'm not talking about passionate fire. I'm talking about fire as in, we don't get along with each other. So a healthy marriage is predicated on, first and foremost, each one understanding that they have different roles to fulfill in this marriage. We're not the same. We're two different people. Biologically, emotionally, and through we're different. And anyone who tells you otherwise either was never married or whatever. I'm not even going to go there. But it's one of the things, and this is for you guys there in the middle. I forgot your name, sorry, but you're not married yet, right?
No.
You're thinking about it. Well, hopefully you'll still be thinking after this class. You learn in marriage, you learn very quickly, as most of you know, that we're not the same. Our interests are not the same. Our modes of operation are not the same. Ish for Isha means that we're two different people. This is an Ish, this is an Isha. What binds us together is the Yud and the Hey, which is God's name. When God becomes the center of your life, when it's a God-centered life, then we have a common goal that we're working towards. And even if we see things differently, but we're both on the same page with a greater picture. When you remove God from the picture, God forbid, you're left with fire. And fire usually doesn't do well to continue a marriage. Okay. It was dumb to put death by the end. Who wants to end on death? Okay, but I guess we got to do it. Any questions on everything up until now? No, we're good? Okay. I was at a lecture last Wednesday night in Camarillo. The topic was cremation. Fascinating lecture. I actually bought 2 books from the author. He's a Canadian from Montreal. He lives in Israel now. He spoke to Hebrew High earlier in the day. It was Valentine's Day last Wednesday. He spoke about love and marriage and intermarriage and what makes a marriage solid. Very interesting. He wrote a book about cremation as well. And he shattered the often repeated myths of why cremation is better and better for the environment. It's simply not true. And a lot of the other things that people will tell you about cremation and landfills. And he talked about the amount of space that there is in America and in the world today, that even if we were to bury, I forgot the exact numbers that he used, if we were to bury like X amount of people every day, that it would still be more than enough space. how much space a body takes up. The only left thing that he could not dismiss was cost. Even though you can get a fancy cremation that will cost you thousands of dollars as well, but if you're doing a mail away online cremation, yes, you can get it for a few $100. However, and he agreed that Jewish cemeteries, even here in California, that charge upwards of $10,000-$20,000 for a funeral, will give it to you for free if they know that it's a real need. Not because you drove up in your Lexus and you just flew back from Hawaii and you're like, my grandmother died, I don't have money for a funeral. You know what? Get out of here. But if it's a real need, I know myself, Mount Sinai has done it. There's a Chabad cemetery in Los Angeles, which will give it to you for next to nothing. And if all else fails, the Chabad rabbis themselves will raise the money to pay for the funeral and all the other expenses. So that's just in terms of cremation itself. Even if a person didn't live as a Jew, at least die as a Jew. And, we do a class here at Chabad every few years. It's called With Honor and Dignity, 3-part series about all of these issues. And it, too, began because of a phone call that I got here. It wasn't funny, but it was funny. A woman called up and she said, my husband, I'm conservative Jew, I just moved here from Florida. My husband, Charlie, just passed away. I need a rabbi to do the funeral. I know you're Orthodox. I'm conservative. Will you do the funeral? I said, yes. What do you need? And I began explaining one thing after the other. And each time said, but we're not Orthodox. I said, let me explain the reason. Oh, yeah, Charlie deserves that. He was a great guy. This is how the conversation went. I got off the phone. I said to Rabbi Bryski, you know what? You can't blame people for not knowing because there's always been a taboo. We never want to talk about death. Don't talk about that. It's a bad omen to talk about it. How is anyone supposed to know? So when the moment finally comes and they're upset and they're overwhelmed, now you're going to sit and give them a lecture. So based on that, we had a lecture we still have a thing called With Honor and Dignity. I tell you the story where the guy called me from Muncie one day to compliment me on the lecture. So I'm giving this lecture, and it's all about death and dying and cremation and embalming, all these things. And it was taped, it was videotaped, and it's on. You can watch it on Jewish.tv. I've gotten 2 comments on this lecture. The first one was, this guy called me one day from Muncie, and he goes, Rabbi, I just want you to know, I watched your lecture, and it was wonderful. You covered everything for me. I've never heard anybody do it so well. I'm thinking, wow, I don't know who wants to watch a lecture on death, but thank you very much. Feeling really good. And then he says to me, by the way, I'm a wholesaler of shrouds, and I'd like to know if you'd like to buy from me. So, I'm not in the funeral business. I just gave a lecture. And the other one was a young boy from my shul who was engaged to be married, and he was driving with his fiancée on a long road trip, and it was nighttime, and he said to her, I want to listen. I'm falling asleep. Put something on, just download something. So she, very unwilling, goes, find something Rabbi Sapo online. She goes, okay, I guess what? I went to Jewish.tv, there's a lecture of Rabbi Sapo. Hit it, put it on. Death and dying. Just what you want to do with your fiancé, driving through the dark roads. Anyway, the bottom line is, even if you didn't live your life as a traditional Jew, for crying out loud, at least at the end, die and be buried as a Jew. It's beautiful. It's heartwarming. There's so much symbolisms, and I want to tell you. I've talked to other rabbis before, non-Orthodox rabbis, and they say, this, that. There's no excuse. There's no excuse for every Jew not getting a traditional Jewish funeral. The simplest of things, where we do the cutting of the garment to express the sadness, so they come up with a black ribbon. What are you, cheap on a shirt? Come on. Your mother died. Rip the shirt for you'll get a new shirt. I just said it 2 weeks ago to a total lady. I said, these buttons will fall apart in your hand. And they did. So I told her it's going to fall apart. They're cheap. There's no sadness about ripping the mortuary's button. Not that there's much sadness about ripping a shirt, but at least you're expressing a sense of, normally your clothes, you look in the mirror before you leave the house, and you want to make sure you look good, and here you're walking out and you're saying, I'm going to rip my shirt because someone died and this is what's important, not the way I look. It's a sign of mourning. Plus it says that the soul no longer needs clothing, the soul is advancing to new life, so therefore you cut the clothing as well. Anyway, very, very quickly, we mentioned at the outset of the class that we value even a corpse, a body. You may have seen the horrific pictures in Israel, God forbid, after a terrorist attack, and they have guys with a green vest going around scraping the blood and collecting the limbs and burying everything. Everything becomes holy. If you have a limb amputated, no matter how old you are, you're supposed to get that limb buried. So you don't give it to the hospital, you take it over to the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish mortuary, and they will bury it for you. I think they do it free of charge, if I'm not mistaken, because it came from God. It goes back the proper way. If it goes with you or separately, without whatever. Blood too, like I said, they scrape it off, the blood off the walls, and they bury it all. Autopsies typically are forbidden in Jewish law unless there is a great need to have one, like in the case of, God forbid, a murder, where it might actually help you solve the crime, or if in the case of a genetic disease, God forbid, if there's a pattern, people dying at a young age, and where the doctors believe that if they do an autopsy, it might help them, lead them towards figuring out what's wrong. Those might be grounds for an autopsy, but just because someone says, we want to know if it was a heart attack or if it was a stroke, or we want to know if it was this or that, cutting out the body for that, for convenience, is not allowed. Organ donations are complicated. I'm not even going to go there right now. And as science develops, it gets more and more interesting and more complicated. The traditional belief was always that organ donations are not allowed unless it's going directly to save someone's life. Then you can, but just to donate to a bank is not so simple. And one of the things you do have to be careful about is the definition of death, which is different in American law versus Torah law. American law is brain dead, means that you're dead. Torah law is heart. The heart has to stop beating. The problem with that is once the heart stops beating, it really doesn't have much value for a heart transplant. The problem is, according to Torah, if you take the heart out while it's still beating, even though the guy's brain dead, technically the guy's still alive. So you just killed somebody. So it's a complicated situation. Yeah.
So you're saying that if you're brain dead and your heart is still going, your body has to stay alive until your heart gives out. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There's actually, I was reading a documented story where somebody was basically brain dead and somehow snapped out of it, and somehow heard, I can show it to you, I read and heard all these conversations of people, saying, okay, he's dead, we're going to bury him, whatever. And wasn't able to respond, obviously, but somehow or another managed to snap out of it. So Judy is very clear, but there's got to be the heart has to stop. It's could, usually it doesn't, but usually the body's shutting down. It's usually
what if they're on machines?
Boy. So the real question is, do we and when do we hook up someone to a machine? That's the real question. And again, please don't walk out of here with any answers to any questions, because every case is different and independent, has to be treated as such. But the rule of thumb, typically, speaking in very general terms, is if you can prolong a life and there's hope for this person, there's hope for a cure or whatever, then go ahead and hook them up. If this guy is as good as gone, but you're not ready to say goodbye yet, you need a few more days, or there's some kid in Australia who wants to fly in to see his father before he's dead, so let's hook him up for 2 days. No, you can't do that, because then you can't unhook. So better don't start the process, because then you're directly killing him. Just let nature take its course. And that's the problem that we have. Someone just had it recently here. He works in Thousand Oaks. His father was in LA. And the wife said to the doctor, just hook him up. My husband, it's going to take traffic till he gets to Thousand Oaks. And he's like, no, you can't do that. You'll never be able to unhook him again. I don't know if it's thankfully, the guy passed away before anything hooked up. And it all worked out well. But that would have been a disaster, because once hooked up to the machine, then you got problems, halachic problems. We're dealing nowadays with a climate of science and medicine versus Torah. And again, it's there's a lot of headbutting that goes on very often in hospitals with doctors and in all of these areas. We stick to our guns because for thousands of years we've talked about the sanctity of life. And with all due respect to doctors, nothing against them. They're doing their job and they're beholden to offices and to financial considerations and all the other things. But that's why hospitals are having ethics committees. I just want to mention, a few months ago, Las Robles Hospital had convened a meeting of all the clergy of the entire Conejo Valley, Ventura County area. Very nice. They went out of the way to get us kosher food, and it was a very, very good meeting. I think they had a second one. I was out of town for it, and they hoped to continue it. And it was a time for clergy to voice their concerns and to talk about the ethics involved and different issues that come up. And there's a lot of issues that come up in hospitals. Okay, flowers versus acts of charity. I think that's a simple one. It's much nicer to donate some money to a good cause in memory of somebody so that it gets used for something good. Not that flowers aren't beautiful, but people spend so much money on flowers and they die 3 days later and there's nothing left. No good was done. And there's one culture in particular, I won't mention who they are, but I don't know what it is with these guys, but they spend thousands of dollars on flowers, and the house of Shiva smells like a florist shop. There's just one bouquet after the other, each one trying to outdo each other, and a few days later there's nothing left. And if these thousands of dollars would have gone to give a kid a scholarship in a camp, in a Jewish camp, in memory of this mother, then probably would have achieved a lot more. Okay, I want to mention one or two more things here, and that is the tahara. Probably the most important part of a Jewish funeral is what's called tahara. Tahara means literally the purification. It's immersing the body in a mikveh, a special mikveh, or at least washing the body down. It's not a cleansing ceremony. It's not just that the body's dirty. It's a very intense ritual that's done by people who are trained, know what they're doing. Men will do it for a deceased male, women for a deceased female. There's a lot of prayers that are said. It's a very, very powerful experience for those who are involved, and I have family members who do this, and they tell me that it's emotionally draining because it's very, very powerful. Just to give you one example, part of this purifying the body, first of all, the body is not just lying there naked without anything. It's totally dignified. And even when they'll do something as, passing something, whether it's a prayer book or a cup or whatever, they will never pass it directly over the body. They'll always walk around. Part of the prayers include apologies to the soul lest we mistreated you. So it's full of prayers. It's a very, very intense ritual, and probably the most important single thing that one should make sure to check that box for when your loved one dies is say you want a tahara, and make sure it's being done by people who know what they're doing and not just, oh yeah, we got, Jim and Joe, they do taharas all the time. I don't got a clue what they're doing. It's like the doctor doing the bris. So here in LA, pretty much most of the Jewish mortuaries will contract with the same men and the same women. There's a society that do it, and they know what they're doing. But do it. And again, just I can leave it on this. I had recently a case where somebody I know asked me to do a funeral for the father. I said, yeah, I'll do it. What's your fees? I said, I don't charge for life cycle events. I look at you, I said, I come, I say a few prayers, I don't charge money for that. If you want to make a donation, you can, but I don't take money. I just have one request. Do a tahara. Explain the whole thing to them, how important it is. It's angelic, the person is going back to God in purity. They dress the person in white shrouds. It's all a sign of purity, innocence, being forgiven for your sins. Couldn't do it. Couldn't win them over. Don't know why. Just ignorance. What are you afraid of? That's what it is. So these are all little things that are important when the time comes. Hopefully it won't come for many, many years, but if it does, when it does, you'll know what to do. Cremation we spoke about. Embalming is also something we don't do. Viewing, a big no-no as well. It's as soon as a person expires, you're supposed to cover them immediately. It's considered disrespectful to be in the presence of a corpse and look at them, gaze at them while they cannot look back at you. It's very undignified. So viewing is not allowed at all. And let's try to end on something uplifting and positive. I just can't think of what, so ask me a question, somebody. Good.
I have back
Good.
to funerals.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. What's with the ban on music? If the deceased had a favorite song that they say, when I die, I want you to play this song, is it allowed or is it forbidden?
It's not forbidden. I mean, we've done it before. It's a simple song. I mean, we're not trying to make a whole musical production out of it, obviously. But if somebody says they want one song playing, or their kid plays guitar and this song was very meaningful, in very Orthodox places they won't do it, although there is a famous story about an Orthodox rabbi who died, and there was a band passing by his funeral, and they said, he had requested a song, and they started playing it. So I don't think it's a big deal with music being piped in or anything. Again, you won't see it in very Orthodox places, but nobody around here is going to stop anybody from doing it. Anybody else?
So is it Chevra Kadisha? Is that the person who watches over the body?
So it's interesting what you just asked. Chevra Kadisha, the literal meaning is the holy brotherhood. That's the meaning of this. Now what's interesting is that of all the different jobs that there are for the Jewish people, right? A Moel, one of the circuits is called a Moel, a rabbi, a cantor. The only people who have the title the Holy Brotherhood are the guys who deal with the dead bodies. Nobody else. You don't call a Moel Kadosh or a Rabbi Kadosh or a Chazan. Only the Chevra Kaddish who deal with dead bodies are called holy. So in every single town, there is a group of people called Chevra Kadisha. Their job is to take you from A to Z with that. In Los Angeles, the mortuary itself named itself Chevra Kadisha. But that's not really, they took the name. But the name really doesn't belong to them. It's a trademark name that belongs to the group of people that do this kind of work. And there are a number of Jewish mortuaries in LA that you can use that are all Orthodox, that do everything the right way. Like the Shomer that watches somebody in traditional mortuaries. I'll have somebody there with a body. They never leave a body alone.
What's called a Shomer?
Shomer.
That's the person that watches the body.
Right. It doesn't actually watch the body. It means that he's in the presence, in the room. And he reads, exactly right.
Right, but that's different than washing of the body.
Correct.
But is it the same person?
No, usually not.
Different person?
It can be, but it's usually not. It's totally two different things. Okay. Let's end with something uplifting again. Join me for Shabbos. Next Shabbos, I tried this last time. You have another chance. It's the last one. Kosher Cup. Which will be interesting and entertaining. And come on over. And if that doesn't work for you, as I mentioned to you last time when I gave the Shabbos class, join me, my wife, my family for any Friday night dinner. You've taken me up on it. It's a wonderful experience. It's nice. It's nurturing. It's wholesome. Good food. Good conversation. And it's a beautiful way to spend Friday night, to spend Shabbat. Thank you all for being here. I guess this is the last one in the series, right?
Yes.
So may we all celebrate lots of brises and bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and weddings, and hopefully not have to deal with funerals.
Amen.
All right, thank you.